Well, it has indeed been a delightful day. I can't tell you how uplifted I feel after interacting with masters of their craft. I almost feel that I don't need an airplane to get back to Kansas. I've just been so buoyed by the things I've learned and the things that I've felt from the passion and the deep, deep commitment and deep level of expertise. So thank you so very much. And it is such an honor to be here. The work that is being done in terms of educational research, in reading and related areas here at the university is truly on the forefront. And you're most fortunate to be associated with such an outstanding program. So thank you for this opportunity, and I'd just like to share with you a couple things of the work that we've been doing, and as we're along this journey of trying to figure out ways to make, if you will, at the end of the day, life fulfilling and happy for kids, for all kids, but especially for those who are struggling in one way or another. I shared with the group this morning that learning is first and foremost a visceral, emotional, affective experience before it's a cognitive one. And to sort of elaborate that point, let me share with you about an outstanding, now young woman. But the story goes back to when she was in middle school, Samantha Beal from Michigan. I met her there. I was presenting to a large audience of teachers and I noticed on the front row sat this young girl, and I thought, why is she here? Maybe to get acknowledged for some award or whatever. But at the conclusion of my remarks, I was responding to some questions, and I noticed that she was standing over here to the side with a couple of adults. Well, the adults turned out to be her mom, one of her teachers, and an artist. Well, it so happened that Samantha was very talented in language, in poetry. And she shared with me, she had brought some of the poems that she had written, and they were absolutely beautiful. And the artist, well known in the upper Midwest states, known for his beautiful watercolors, and he had illustrated a couple of them. And so the question was, do you know a place where we might get published? And so I made some recommendations. Long story short, they got published. They appeared on the Today Show and so forth. And then as a young adult, rolled his clock forward, 28 years of age, and she wrote another book that you see here, My 13th Winter. Let me share with you just a little excerpt from this book. I hated going to the store to buy music, a book, clothes, groceries. I also disliked the idea of people finding out that I didn't get things that were so simple for everyone else, like comparing prices or figuring out a 15% tip. And then what she does is she goes into a first person describing a situation in a store. Standing in the checkout line, all of my movements seem exaggerated, awkward. I feel as if I'm on stage like I don't belong, as if everyone is staring at me and judging me. I think they all see the stain on my shirt or that my jacket doesn't match. 1,000 eyes seem to scrutinize my appearance, confirming my every insecurity. My lips get dry. I don't know where to look because someone will read my glance, interpret it, judge me, know that I don't know what I'm doing. I wait for the woman ahead of me to finish writing out her check. I wait for my test. The woman moves out of view, bags rumpling. With stifled breath, I step up to the counter and place the items down. It feels reassuring to have something to do, but then I begin to feel self-conscious that I'm taking too long at the counter. The store clerk finishes ringing up the total. I open my wallet as he announces $15.28. $15.28. I have a 20. I go blank. I don't know if it's enough. To stall, I repeat back the total to make sure I have it right. The woman behind me suddenly feels very close, as if she were pressing against me. I can hear and feel the impatience in her breathing and the rumpling of her shopping bags. A few seconds stretch into forever. I feel like everyone is behind me is becoming hostile and impatient with me. Shame flushes into my cheeks. I look down, hesitate for a second, and pull out the 20. For an instant, my heart stops. All sound retreats. Everything feels as if it's moving in slow motion as I hand the clerk the $20 bill and watch his reaction, waiting to read the unspoken signs that I haven't given him enough. He glances at it, accepts it, and turns to the register. Instantly, the world resumes its movement in real time. The knot in my stomach unravels. All the pushing impatience of the bodies behind me fades away. They feel like ordinary people waiting their turn. I can breathe again. I smile, say thank you, and walk out. Once again, I have just barely escaped disaster. So, the ramifications of not being able to comprehend and to learn and to be able to navigate life without that knot in your tummy is really what I think we're all about. And so I'd like to share with you a couple things from our center to put this work into perspective. You know, we hear a lot about the performance gap, the achievement gap, and so on. The way that we look at it is this: if you think of the horizontal line being years in school, the vertical line being the skills that kids pick up, the assumption is that students go through school, in a year they pick up a year of skills. In 3 years they pick up 3 years of skills, right? And that straight line there represents theoretically normal achievement. Now notice, oops, did you see that word join up the skills word? Do you see demands up there? Okay, now watch the blue line. Do you see on top of the blue line came a yellow one? Okay, what that represents is the fact that as kids go through school, they acquire skills, but as they acquire skills, the demands go up as well, right? And so if they're acquiring skills at the prescribed rate, they should be in a situation to respond to the demands that is depicted by that. On the other hand, we know that there are some kids who go through school and they don't pick up the skills per grade level. And so what starts to develop is the infamous gap. Well, what we know through some research that we've conducted is that by the time students hit about the 5th or 6th grade level, oftentimes the acquisition of those skills tends to plateau. Now, what doesn't plateau there? The demands. So you see how that gap just gets geometrically wider. To see that and the implications, if we take a student in the 9th grade reading at the 5th grade level, we can see where he is on the red line. Now, if we want him to be reading at or above, or performing at or above, or at the grade level upon graduation at grade 12, how many years of skills must he or she acquire per year in school? The answer's up there at the top. 2.5 years of skill for every year they're in school. Now that's a steep climb. So the question becomes, how do we make that happen? Well, to set the stage for that, do you know what that thing is? Rather gross. But it's been a while since you've eaten, so that's okay. Okay, that's a New Guinea tapeworm. Okay, and it usually, the source of it is impure drinking water, and it is often found in third world countries. And it's just a very painful, debilitating condition. can see that. Now, you can't see this too well. It's not well depicted, but there's some women down here with big jugs on their head. Do you see that? And so what is often the case in some of these countries is women go down to the water source, get the water and bring it back. And what do they bring back with it? The larva, okay? And it then creates the problem. Well, what some researchers did was to try to figure out, can we break this cycle? And so what they did is they tried to find a village that shared a water source with some other villages, all of whom had a high incidence of New Guinea tapeworm, but one village didn't. What they were looking for is a positive deviant. And so they found one, and they went in and they studied, what did they do differently that the others don't do? And what they found is that in this village, when the women came back with the water, they would get another jug, take the hem of their skirt, and put it over the second jug, and then filter the water through it, thus filtering out the larva. Now, the authors of this book that is called The Influencer, have any of you seen this? Here's another one for summer reading for cohort 1. This is a good one. But they describe this experiment in there, and they talk about this notion of vital behaviors, making the point that straining the water into the second water jug is a vital behavior. Well, what's a vital behavior? It's something that exponentially improves your results. You can tell exactly what to do and how to do it, and tends to stop self-defeating behaviors, and it often starts a chain reaction for some other things. Okay? So it's a high leverage behavior. The keys, behaviors or actions, not all behaviors are equal, and only a few are genuinely vital. So why are vital behaviors so important? Well, we know there's lots of things to do in our day-to-day life in teaching, right? And on the surface, most of the things we do are good things. The issue isn't whether it's good or not. The issue is whether it's vital. Okay? And this is especially the case, just to put that statement into context, if we look back at the graphic of that 2.5-year gap that we must close per year of kids in school, we don't have time to mess around with things that are nice but not necessary, that are good but aren't vital. Okay? So that's what I'd like to have you consider. In the world of adolescent literacy, what are the vital behaviors that you think or that you have found to be absolutely essential? Would anyone be willing to share, if you had to place your bet on a couple things, what would they be? Engagement of students, moving them from a passive to an active posture. Great. Yes? Assessment. What kind of assessment? Okay. And, just to expand upon that, the literature does tell us proper kind of progress monitoring or formative assessment, when we do that right and feed the data back to the kids and we use it in a proper way, it can be very, very powerful. Great. Thank you. Any others? I'm sure you've got some. But that's okay. You didn't come here to talk. You came expecting me to talk, right? Okay. So here are 4 that we've got. I'm not saying these are the 4. I'm just saying these are ones that are continue to capture our attention through some of the research that we've done. Number one, that when we make plans for instruction and intervention, that we do so in light of the students and the demands they face. Frequently, we only do so in light of students. We look at what's wrong with them. What is their learning profile? We think it's equally as important, if not more important, to look at the demands of the curriculum that they are struggling with, and to work backward from that, do some backward designing, and say what kind of strategies and things do we need to put in place to enable the kids to respond successfully to those demands. Well, we can't hit that trajectory if we don't understand what the trajectory is. Secondly, we think it's important to demonstrate strong beliefs and to understand the role that beliefs play in the learning process. Third, the importance of using high leverage instruction. Not all instruction is of equal worth and of equal value. Not all instructional behaviors are. Well, what are some of the high leverage ones? And fourth, to build a tiered, coordinated system within a school. One of the biggest deterrents, one of the biggest challenges for kids, for adolescents who are struggling in learning is the fragmentation that they face in secondary schools. That is, in the elementary school, they'll typically have one teacher all day long, right? So that teacher sees the beginning from the end. As a child struggles in the morning, you can follow up on that throughout the day. Not so in secondary schools. So what we have found in the places where we're getting the biggest movement is there's a commitment to standing back and looking at a school as a system, singular, not systems. Right now, districts or jurisdictions are systems, and schools are systems. And the problem is the systems often don't coordinate. And hence there's a lot of linkage and slippage. Okay, so let's just take a look at these things real quickly. Students and demands. As a matter of fact, because we're short of time, guess what? I'm going to save you from doing that. Okay, here's as we have done some descriptive studies on on adolescent learners. And here's what the study that we did. We got about 80 to 90 students in 5 groupings. In the 5 groupings, in the state of Kansas, we give a state assessment every year. And there's like super proficient, proficient, sort of proficient, below proficient, and not so good. Something like that, okay? So we got kids from each of those clusters who were performing that way on the state assessments. We then went in and administered to them a broad array of reading measures covering alphabetics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Then what we did is we divided the kids from those who were on the proficient side of the state assessment and those who were struggling. And what we see is their performance represented here, and with the mean being 100, you can see that the kids who are above proficient did reasonably well, although there's some struggling here with fluency. But the kids who were struggling were at least a standard deviation below the mean and an average, and struggling in all of these areas, in all of the areas. To break that, we did a latent class analysis on the poor comprehenders, those on the low end, and we found that there were 5 distinct groups of students. Interestingly, about 80% of the students fell in 1 standard deviation or below, more below the mean. Now, the reason I'm sharing that with you is basically the message is this, is that if we're going to look at at students and say, well, it's just a comprehension problem, or it's just a vocabulary problem. Interestingly, in this research told us that many struggling adolescents do not have the basic word level skills and fluency skills in place. And that's important for us to just bear that in mind as we look at the programming decisions that we make. On the flip side, looking at the demands of students, or the demands that they face, what about the texts? Well, they become longer. The word complexity increases. The sentence complexity increases. The structural complexity increases. The graphic representations become more important. And the conceptual challenge increases as kids go along. And finally, the texts vary greatly across content areas. So the lift that they're facing, so they have some challenges as individual readers, and then they're facing this big lift out there in terms of the complexity of what they're facing. Now, something that we talked about this afternoon in our cohort 1 was this interesting dynamic of the information explosion, instructional time dilemma that works like this. If we go back to 1970 and we say, well, let's look at the instructional time the kids had to learn, or the teachers had to teach. It's represented by that green box. And the content they had to teach is represented by the yellow box. So there's more content than there is time, right? So we go up to 1990. Has the time changed? No, that's about the same. Has the content amount that they're expected to teach changed? It has. So we go up to 2013. Has the time changed? Has the content changed? That's a heavy load. Heavy load for kids, heavy load for teachers. That's why it's important for us to understand that. And this reality can drive, or should drive, the decision-making in our thinking as we choose content to teach. It's incumbent upon us to choose content that is critical and recognize that it's important we identify critical content that is difficult. Now, why do I say that? I say that because if it's critical, it's got to be taught, right? We want to identify what's difficult because that tells us that's something we need to mediate the understanding of. And so it's important, looking at all that content and say, what can I put to the side? What can be learned independently? What need not be taught? And what do we focus on? Are you familiar with this book? It basically is addressing the question how computers are creating the next job market. And it concludes, after looking at a host of data, that there's 2 skills that are needed as we look to the future for looking at job trends and so forth. One of which is what they call expert thinking. What is expert thinking? That is the wherewithal to solve problems for which there are no rule-based solutions. We all love the car mechanic, don't we, who, does more than just plug the car into the machine and looks at it and says, well, the machine says it's okay, and you know darn well it's not okay. You love someone who can think it through and problem solve. The world is open to those individuals. The second is that, doing tasks that computers can't be programmed to do. The next skill set is what they refer to as complex communications. Complex communications. That is, being able to interact with others to acquire information, explain it, or persuade others of its implications for action. So it's not just surface level texting, but it's It's at a much deeper level. Recognizing the demands of the curriculum, recognizing the complexity, its volume, recognizing what the world out there is requiring, all those things need to shape and drive the kinds of things that we do in the class. And of course, then there's these, the hard to measure but important feelings of identity, uncertainty, fear, motivation, beliefs, and attitudes that kids encounter. Okay, so that's the first factor that we think is an important one, a vital set of things for us to do to guide what we do and drive what we do to teach students more effectively. The second one is this notion of beliefs. And you know, when we move into beliefs, there's several of my colleagues in the university who sort of roll their eyes and they say, come on, you can't measure that, and we're moving into the land of squishy, squishy. And it's true, you know, it's hard to measure what kids believe about things. It's hard to measure what we believe about things. But just because we can't measure it doesn't mean we don't think about it, and doesn't mean we don't take it into account. How many of you like kitty cats? Okay. Well, let's say that we have a little kitty cat like this, and we take it up to a little 2-year-old who has never seen a kitty cat before. And you put this nice little kitty cat in this child's lap, and it purrs, and he pets it, and he hugs it, and it's just a wonderful experience. At the end of that, you take the kitty cat away. What does that child's initial beliefs about kitty cats become? Positive? It does, doesn't it? Based on what he's experienced. Now, the next day he comes over to Grandma's house and put the new kitty cat down, and the kitty cat's having a bad hair day. And scratches or bites the child. Has the belief of that child toward kitty cats changed just a bit? It has, hasn't it? Hiram Smith, talks about this notion of a belief window. He says every individual has this hypothetical band around their head and a wire that comes out in front of you, and you've got this window in front of us. And no matter which way you turn, there's this window in front of you. And on that window is written beliefs that you hold about the world. And it's a filter through which you take things in about the world around you. For example, this child here, looking out, what kind of day is it in reality out there? It's a sunny day, isn't it? What does he see on his belief window? A cloudy day and so forth. Well, why is that? Who knows? But how's he going to react to things that come in his way? Is it a sunny day or a cloudy day? It's what's written on his belief window, isn't it? What do you think was written on her belief window about people? Pretty high, about their goodness? What do you think is written on this person's belief window about certain groups of people? Do beliefs drive behavior? They have an influence on behavior. They have an influence on the behavior of us as teachers, us as parents, as we look at children and what we believe about them, what they can do, what they can become. And they have beliefs they have an influence on our actions and what we do and how we respond to things. So, what do we think? What is our belief about the kids we encounter? What do we see in them? What do we see in them becoming? And what is the effect of the things written on your belief window about the kids with whom you interact? I'm going to finish this, and then, Lynn, I'm seeing our time, so I'd like to open it to questions so that we honor that time, okay? So let me just finish this. We did a little study asked some teachers, but obviously we didn't do that study here. My sense is after interacting with the teachers that I did here today, we'd get different answers. So this is from the States. We asked them, what's the biggest barrier to struggling learner success? For kids who are struggling, why is it? And here are the big reasons they gave. As you look at those, if you had to categorize that set of beliefs, what would you say about it? About that set here?
Based on the student?
Yeah, based on the student. Who is, his attitudes, they neglect their work, low ability, poor, and of course then you throw the parents in there for the fifth one, right? So the fingers are pointed out. So it's somewhat instructive. We asked this question, given high quality instruction, how confident are you that struggling adolescent readers can read close to grade level? Okay. If you don't believe they can do it, does that influence that internal drive and so forth? Do kids pick that up if you communicate, even if you don't say the words, can they pick that up? They can, can't they? Oh, it is so important. It is so, so important in what happens. And then I'll end with this. In regard to the growth of mind, we should set our goals very, very high. Because we know that most people are capable of more than they do or are. Now, if I can just share with you a personal story about how important beliefs are, how critical high-quality instruction is. We've got 13 grandchildren, and you say you don't compare them, but you do compare them. And we had two of them who were born, one lived in Salt Lake City and one lived in Louisville. And they were born a month apart. Malia, the little girl, and Dre, the little boy. And as they took off, we noticed that Dre, in terms of his acquisition of language and so forth, was advanced. Man, he's just very verbal and imitate and so forth. It was just, little Malia was just a stone-faced little thing, and no nothing. I mean, we had conversation. What about Malia? What about, And we got them together at Christmas time. They happened to be together, and here was Dre babbling away, and here's Malia just looking. And so then life goes on. About 3 years of age, 3.5 years, came together again, and here Malia had caught up. Well, and thought, okay, there's that little girl spurt. And then they were away, and they came back together about a month later, and Malia had markedly passed Dre. We thought, well, that's the girl spurt. And then we noticed that Dre seemed to be doing some strange thing with his language. Long story short, in 6 months, he lost all of his language. All of his ability to speak disappeared. What they discovered is he had a nocturnal seizure disorder, a rare one called Landau-Kleffner syndrome. So during the day, all was normal. At night, you'd look at him, he's peaceful as a lamb, but his little brain was just seizuring away. So anything he learned during the day just was whapped out of there at night. Okay. Dre is now 7. And it took him a couple years to get the drugs to get the seizures under control. So he's on a long journey to relearn speaking, language, socialization, and all that. And I'll tell you, he has been so blessed. This is a picture of Dre. He's been, this was about a week ago, and he came back from working with a language tutor. And she had given him a bunch of crickets, and they did some language work around crickets. And then she'd follow up with him with emails about the crickets, and they'd talk back and forth. And to see him come alive when he's with Barbara, who he knows, believes, you're around her, and she communicates her belief in him and caring for him. And you watch her, and she is expertise, master teacher at work. That magical combination of understanding your craft, applying it beautifully, with a strong belief and love and caring for those with whom we work. And that, in a nutshell, I think embodies the work that we are trying to do. So that's enough. I know we wanted to ask some questions, so let me just open it up for that, and we want to honor the time that you can leave. So what questions might you have, if any? Yes?
We're curious about number 3, the high leverage.
Teaching behaviors?
I want you to stop before that one.
Okay, well, here's the story. The reality is, when we look at 3 factors trying to understand variance in reading gains, okay, all these factors, the students themselves and the characteristics that they have, has an effect. The schools that they're in, has an effect. But the big one that really makes a difference are the teachers that they work with. Now, you familiar with Hattie's work? Okay, now this is not one I'd recommend for beach time reading. Okay, although he's done a second book for teachers. But in this book, you see a meta-analysis, or a synthesis of over 800 meta-analyses. Can you imagine his life? I mean, wow. But what's cool, this is from another article. You see over on the left-hand side are some teaching behaviors. At the very top of the list, feedback, the effect size in the middle, and over the side, the source of influence. Look, if we look at teachers, students, home, and peers, look at where teachers are. And these are some of the top ranked ones. And you can see. So that's a good source to look at. Another good source, let's see, is here. Are you familiar with the IES Practice Guide? Okay, which is a nice collection. This is their list of recommendations. Now, what's important, what they missed in their review was caught by a second review done by the Center on Instruction, Joe Torgeson and his team at Florida State. They basically found what the IES one found, these factors, okay, explicit vocabulary instruction, comprehension instruction, text meaning, so forth. But they found a last one here, and that is teaching essential content knowledge and critical concepts. For adolescents, and we talked about this in Cohort 1 this afternoon, but so much of our cachet as an adolescent to make and navigate our way through the system is to be able to understand critical content and concepts and to build upon that, because that is what enables us to problem solve, engage in expert thinking, complex communications, and so forth. That got us through number 3. How about other questions?
Are there any questions from
Yes.
remote?
Okay. Yes? No? Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I was sort of interested in this critical content that you talked about.
Uh-huh.
But a lot of that seems to be driven by things like time in the States and certain assessments that have to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And those assessments are really driven by particular assessments that have been created. And so there is a small set of skills that are determined to be that critical content. So I'm just wondering how you think about that in terms of adolescent literacy.
Mm-hmm. Great question. And just to you referenced No Child Left Behind, just a little comment on the journey that the United States has been on. No Child Left Behind came out, and one of the components of that was that each state had to come up with some assessments for their students. Well, the way in which these assessments were, they had to do this in pressure cooker fashion. They assembled a group, teams of teachers and others together in the summer, and they came up with a bunch of standards and so forth. They did the best they could under the conditions that they operated. But the reality was there were a lot of flaws in that conceptualization, the consistency, and so forth. All right? And states had a bunch of different standards. So it was theoretically moving in the right direction, but practically and logistically it was a mess. So right now, so learn from that. Learn from our mistakes. Okay? So the next iteration is this. The federal government has invested nearly $400 million, which is not spit in the ocean, in terms of coming up with a new set of standards, which is called the Common Core State Standards. And there's been a major investment in bringing together a lot of people to work on and think through in a systematic, much more thoughtful way than could be done before. So that was the standards. The $400 million is now going into a new era of testing, in which it's looking, these tests are looking at both kids meeting benchmarks and a growth model is built into it. But now, if you have some standards like that, I think it then drives more meaningful assessments. But ultimately, in the content we need to teach to kids, we need to look at what are the expectations that they need to meet and work backward from that to frame some questions. The pickle we're caught in as a teacher is if some of those decisions that are made on the standards and what's going to be in the assessments are of questionable worth. That's where the challenge is. And I don't have a good answer for that. Yes?
I'll ask my pet question that I mentioned to you when you started. How do you bridge the gap between reading and comprehension has become a big problem, not only in English language learners, but also in the United States. People can't understand the directions of a simple idea lifted. So, do you have any quick solutions to that?
Okay. The question was around the gap between reading like at the decoding level and reading comprehension, and do I have any quick fixes? Bo does. Yeah, I would say this. First of all, as a general rule, for kids who have a history of failing, nothing is quick. And I think that's one of the things that, one of the errors that we make is if we think that, hey, there's some neat activities or worksheets or something like that, we'll do it. There are some of the things in terms of that have been outlined in the IES findings and so forth that if done, and we focus on those areas and do so in a very well-designed instruction that goes from scaffolds the learning and goes all the way up through generalization, deliberate, explicit instruction around generalization of the strategies and the skills, not just the acquisition. We often cut off on generalization, which shortchanges the student.